Welcome to Business Talk here on Business Tech. Great to be in the studio and to talk about something that I think is really close to all of our hearts as consumers and as business leaders as well, and that is customer experience. What does it really mean to excel when it comes to customer experience? And in studio, we've got Rod Wolfenden, who's a EY Africa Markets leader. And it's great, Rod, to have you here talking about something that I think many South African companies aspire to, great customer service. You see it emblazoned in the values. How many get it right? Well, probably too few, to be perfectly frank. So thanks for coming on down and chatting to us about this. Let's just talk it from a human first, from a leader, obviously, but from a human perspective. What does excellence in customer service really mean?
Michael, firstly, thanks for having me on the show. What does it mean? I think at the most fundamental level, it's about empathy. So our ability or the ability of companies to put themselves in their customers' shoes. And it's amazing how easy that sounds, and yet often how difficult it is for some organizations for a whole host of reasons, some of which we can explore later. But those companies that really demonstrate that sense of empathy, understanding at the various stages of a buying process or of a touch point with the customer, what are they going through, and how do we need to design to try and make that as seamless as is possible? I think that's at the heart of it, Michael.
It sounds so simple. Just put yourself in the shoes of your customer, understand what they want, what their buying motivation is, or acquisition of a service motivation is, and you'll be able to delight them. I think, though, in practice, because we're all so unique and so different, it is a lot more difficult to execute on. Maybe you could talk about some of the myths that we have around customer centricity and customer service and explode some of those today.
Sure. So there are a few myths, Michael. One of them is it really worth it? Does it make financial sense? Because at the end of the day, most customers are really just super price sensitive. So they care more about price than they do about service or experience.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the myths. I think another is this idea that it costs too much for an organization to invest sometimes in the tools, the systems, retraining of people to get this right. And so at the end of the day, when you do the numbers, does it make sense to embark on these sometimes quite complex, certainly time-consuming journeys to get customer experience right? I would say to you, Michael, unequivocally, from my experience as a customer, from some of the data I've seen, it does make sense to embark on these journeys. I've seen data that says, hey, when you get this right, and we've looked at data in some, when you get this right, you will often see more loyal customers. You will often see stronger growing customers. So the relationships with these clients over time continues to grow. Often see more profitable relationships with those customers. And so when you put all of that together, actually it does say for those companies that invest the time and the money to get it right, it does make sense financially, let alone the impact it has on things like customer experience scores, net promoter scores, and the like.
Some of those intangible benefits. And it's so interesting listening to you talk about that, because you're talking about having the data at your disposal, whereas intuitively that also aligns with my experience as a consumer. I was recently in the market for a new motor vehicle, and you go and it's a largely commoditized experience, and you look at price and it's pretty much the same around the place. And you go to a few dealerships and you really walk away feeling quite different depending on how that customer interaction has gone through. Has the sales agent understood what I'm looking for? And you're much more likely to go and do repeat business with that individual. In my case, it was for a Toyota Land Cruiser, which you can spec up. And I would go back to the individual that really stuck out for me in this whole process. And I think that's why it's so important. We spend a lot as businesses to acquire customers, yet we're not investing enough on retaining those customers. But a lot of this comes down to how we approach this and using the new digital tools, and omni-channel is the big buzzword. Maybe we can just talk about some of the myths when it comes to digital as well and how we get this right, because what worries me about the digital process is, yes, it opens up new markets, but it can feel sometimes a little bit impersonal if you're not doing it correctly.
Oh, yeah. That's so right. I mean, let's look at some simple examples. Most airlines, you can go onto the website. Most of them have an app. You can download that. And at the convenience of the phone in your hand, you're able to look at flight schedules. You can book a flight. You can decide where on the flight you actually want to sit. So someone like myself with fairly long legs, I do try and go for the slightly extra leg room seats.
I was wondering if you played lock in high school, but
I played basketball, so not too different from your typical lock, at least in height. But the convenience of being able to do that is incredibly powerful. You could today get onto DinePlan and, book a restaurant really within the space of a matter of minutes, where historically you would have needed to phone the restaurant, wait to get through, speak to someone, try and arrange the time, etc., etc. And so there definitely is space for tools, for technology, for your digital type interfaces that supports and even enhances the experience. But we've also seen examples, and there are many, and we've all had them, where you get onto the app or a site, you're greeted by a chatbot, you kind of submit whatever it is, your query, this chatbot comes back, doesn't quite get it right. Your frustration begins to pick up. The chatbot is misreading that. It misses the kind of the nuances of language, etc. And so the chatbot just keeps coming back with more standard type responses where what you're looking for is a little more specific. And it misses it just doesn't pick up in the same way that a human would have picked up the fact that Michael is now becoming more frustrated in this. So I would say there are certainly instances where the use of tech doesn't always equate to an enhanced experience. And I think there is a lot of room to get better with that tech so that once you've invested in it, it really does lead to this growing and increasingly better customer experience.
And I think it's actually unforgivable in today's world, Rod, when you think about how we as consumers interact with ChatGPT, for example. And, that's a consumer-grade large language model that's just exploded out of the blocks. And we realize how powerful this AI technology via large language models is to understand nuance and context and tailor its responses to us. So that becomes your default as a consumer. You think, well, why is brand X not delivering that to me? I recall an insurer sending me a text because it thought I was a Kaiser Chiefs supporter. Meanwhile, I'm a Sundowns supporter when it comes to local football. I think, well, how can you not know me? It's just so frustrating. What do you think leaders are trying to rally their teams around more broadly, though, if we're to zoom out, when it comes to the customer experience piece of the puzzle that you want to get right as a corporation? What are the various teams being rallied around if you're a leader inside an organization, if you want to crack this code?
So I mean, Michael, I think with any significant change in an organization, there is a very strong need for the signal to come from the top. So setting the tone, the tone at the top, we often refer to it as. And that's where the leaders signal to the organization the importance of, in this instance, customer experience. That it's not just important to us, but it's actually at the core of our strategy and of our success going forward. Having done that, there are other things we've got to get right. We've got to train our people. And what does that mean? Because you look at many organizations, Michael, they're still set up in silos. And so if one silo feels it's doing its bit and it's being incentivized to get that right, well, then that's where it's focused. But it takes leadership and the organization to recognize that we need to collaborate across our silos if we are going to transform what that experience looks like and feels like for our customers. And there's a really big shift that's got to happen there. And when it comes to something like training, I think of to use an airline example, Emirates, when they embarked on their journey, one of the things they did was actually engage with a top hospitality management school to get them to help Emirates to design and then to deliver the training that their in-flight stewards would embark on. And so when you're engaging as a passenger on that airline, you're actually getting an elevated level of experience. And so setting the tone from the top, looking through the silos, embarking on training, and finally, Michael, I would add KPIs, metrics, because, often, as they say, what gets measured gets done. And so when those metrics are aligned to delivering an elevated client experience, then we're giving ourselves an opportunity to get it right.
Now, you're talking my language now, Robert Kaplan and the balanced scorecard. And, you've got to be able to measure these things. You can't just come in with vibes and say, right, guys, we've got to treat the customers better. And you've got the data now, you've got the ability, you've got the tools. I think a lot of it does boil down to culture, though. And, I love the comment you made around silos, because I think inside an organization, you may as a leader think, well, you're front of house. You deal with the customer, so let's train all our energy on training you up. But now I've got to go back and maybe I've got to work with someone in finance, get a credit application done. Finance is just focused on its little piece. And so maybe it's not delivering as quickly as you at front of house wants. And so the customer gets frustrated because there's a fragmented approach to this. How do we drive that culture through an organization to ensure that we get this right to delight the customer?
So, Michael, one of the best ways, and certainly not the only, but one of the best ways is to get these teams, your front stage or front of house, and your backstage, back of house folks, to come together cross-functionally and to develop what are commonly referred to as journey maps. So the customer journey map, which in essence is about when you look at the entire journey of the customer, with its different touch points, what does that look like? What does front of house get to do? What do they rely on back of house to do? And back of house, which systems and tools and applications do they need in order to support this? When you get those teams cross-functionally to do that journey mapping and to identify some of those key, they call them like moments of truth or moments that matter. So some of those points that really just make a difference to a customer if we get it right. When you have those teams working and solving for it collaboratively, it really opens this up, because it's no longer about you chasing someone in finance or in compliance to get some little piece of it, and they don't have an understanding of what the big picture looks like. They now come together to develop that. Incredibly powerful.
And I'm just thinking of the Springboks recently in the first 20 minutes of that Ellis Park test match. Front office and back office were in harmony, weren't they? The forwards were driving through quick ball, front football that allowed the back line to express themselves. We scored some great tries. I think what happened for the next 60 minutes we could probably not talk about, rather. But, from that perspective, which parts can quietly interfere with that cultural process that you're trying to drive inside an organization that can maybe disrupt the harmony that you're trying to develop as a leader?
I think sometimes, Michael, you get this disconnect between where the organization is looking to go in terms of its strategy. So, for example, a strategic priority might be, how do we transform our customer experience? Great. But the reality is the organization structure, the design of the organization, the metrics, the incentives have not yet been adjusted to align to those new priorities. And so what you can find is the strategic intent is one thing, but actually the way people are being rewarded is something else. And so without it being anyone's kind of malicious intent to be a bottleneck or to disrupt this process, what you have is friction that gets introduced because the team that should be delivering this is still very focused on an older set of incentives and metrics, whereas the strategy is to shift the organization in a new direction. And sometimes there's this lag effect, I refer to it as. The strategy is one thing, but the behaviors haven't yet caught up. Getting and narrowing that lag effect, I think, then results in much stronger alignment, where if it is the culture and the organization's priorities to move in a particular direction, you see the behavior of the entire organization moving in sync. That's when you can reduce this lag effect. And that's change management, it's training, it's tone at the top, it's all of those things coming together.
Yeah. And understand, incentives drive behavior at the end of the day. And you read Kahneman and Tversky and all of the great behavioral economists, and they really understand this intuitively. If you've got the wrong incentive structures, trying to drive an entirely different strategy that's misaligned with those, you're always going to get the wrong outcomes. So if you had one piece of advice to a business leader watching this today to get this right, to build a culture inside an organization that marries to the strategy, that ultimately delights the customer, attracts them in, retains them, and builds that loyalty over time, what would it be?
And Michael, if you'll allow me, I think it always helps just to go back to a few simple examples. I think of an Amazon, for example. Late 90s, when they got started, one of their central kind of core ethos was about putting the customer at the center, being customer obsessed. I remember seeing this statement by Jeff Bezos at the time, that they would be customer obsessed, customer centric, all of that kind of language that was unambiguous about the customer at the center, and then everything else being designed around it to deliver that experience. 25, 26 years on, market capitalization of $2 trillion or somewhere in that region. And it's not to say Amazon don't have challenges. I'm not suggesting that everything about Amazon is hunky-dory. But what I am certainly saying is their focus on the customer and the customer experience has stood them in good stead. I think about the likes of a Netflix or a Spotify. I really enjoy my music, and a streaming app like Spotify gets to understand me personally and my listening preferences and tastes. And that sense of customer delight when they make recommendations that really land with you. It's wonderful, right? It's absolutely wonderful. So coming back to your question, I think it's going back to basics. Customers want to be treated well. And for us to get that right, we really have to have empathy. We've got to be able to put ourselves in our customers' shoes and then work backwards from there. And that takes a lot of focus. It takes a relentless pursuit of getting that right. And it takes actually getting the engagement and the buy-in of the organization, because it's not enough for some pockets of the organization to believe in this and other pockets not to. It's got to be a very collaborative effort.
Yeah, it's a team sport.
It's completely a team sport.
Great examples that you used of Netflix and Spotify, two products that I absolutely love as well. And just as a father, you made me think of another one that I think you could throw into that basket, which is, in the real world of tangible things, bricks, Lego. I've got two daughters who love Lego, and I love the way that Lego, by being empathetic in a set with a barcode now, when you finish the set, you can QR code scan the set. You fill in a little questionnaire. Did you enjoy making that? What have you built in the past? What would you improve upon? What would you add? What would you like to see? And then you get to submit it, and you could win a prize at the end. My daughters are really engaged in that kind of thing, and what they're doing is mining data, trying to understand what they like so they can bring out the new set, the next collaboration that they do really well. And again, while you can see a customer in the physical space using digital tools to delight its end users at the end of the day. Great examples. Rod Wolfenden, thank you very much, EY Africa Markets Leader. It's been a delight talking to you about how we keep our customers delighted and engaged here on Business Talk.
Thank you, Michael.